sing. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need. All you need. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need. 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 Love is all you need.
Hallelujah, brothers and sisters. Welcome to Dr. Doug's Old Time Gospel Hour, your home for country and western disco gospel. This is the place where your sin is our business, and the offering plate is never quite full enough. Most of you don't know me. You haven't missed anything. Those of you that do know me, my brothers and sisters from higher dimensions, and people that know me through my photography, you are all saying, what the hell is he doing in the pulpit of All Souls? This is like Donald Trump in the White House, you know. Oh, boy. I'm kind of saying the same thing myself, you know. Yeah, for me to be here is a surprise. Is a surprise. For you to understand why that this is as unusual as it is, that I end up here, you would need to know where I came from. All right, so to take you to where I came from, we're going to have to go back a ways. We're going to go to a place 24 miles from where we are right now. That direction, out there on the Oklahoma prairie between Collinsville and what is now Oologah Lake. And we're going to have to go way back, all the way to 1933. This is where my spiritual, theological, ethical, moral roots began. In 1933, my grandfather, with a team of mules, hauled logs out of the Caney River bottom, and they built a church out there on the Bald Prairie. That was the depths of the Great Depression. Out west, the Dust Bowl is blowing away Oklahoma. Around here, anybody that can is loading up the Model A and taking the Grapes of Wrath tour down Route 66 to California. In that very dark, desperate time, they built a church. Coincidentally, my mother was born the day that church was dedicated. That is the faith family, the tradition, the theology that I grew up in. Now, I would also tell you that as a kid, I was a very sickly kid and had to spend several hours resting each day, and my mother would have to read to me to kind of keep me pacified, and did the best she could with that. And one day there was a knock on the door, and a traveling salesman was selling these 10-volume sets of the Bible story. Do you remember the blue book you would see in the doctor's waiting room? Does anybody remember that? Okay, a couple do. So this was a 10-volume set, beautifully illustrated Bible stories. And she read those to me, and when she wouldn't read them to me, I would sit there and just look at the illustrations. At an early age, I just fell in love with those stories and those characters, the God of that book. This is where I learned the love of God and about hell. So yeah, that is my roots, and I told you all that ancient history to say that people whose roots are that deep go back that far, they don't make changes. They don't make changes easily. I did not do it easily or without thought or willingly. For me to go from that mindset, those roots, to here, how did that happen? Well, the beginning of this change, after about 40, almost 50 years in that sort of a mindset, I found myself sitting in a marriage counselor's office. Not an easy person to be married to. And I was whining about how my wife would not go to church with me. And I would, it didn't even have to be my church. I would be willing to go to any church if my wife would just go to church with me. The therapist says, Rebecca, is there a church you would go to with Doug? It got quiet. Quiet like a courtroom before they read the guilty verdict. Rebecca says, well, I've been reading in the newspaper about this Carlton Pearson, the things he's saying and the trouble it's got him into, and I don't think I'd like to try that church. Oh boy. So sight unseen, having never heard of the man before, I agreed to go to Carlton Pearson's Higher Dimensions for 6 weeks. Yeah, boy, that was a culture shock. Okay, I come from a Baptist theology, and this is a charismatic bunch. They're African American, and I'm not. Yeah, you noticed that. Yeah. Everything was painted purple and gold. Services would last 3 hours. I'm not joking. They were 3 hours. But the music was just transplendent. Amazing. Beautiful. David Smith, thank you. You made it bearable. It was touch and go for a while, yeah. Yeah, but I listened to what Carlton Pearson said, and you know, he was saying all sorts of things. He was saying there is no hell. He was saying there is no devil. He never met my mother-in-law. Maybe he's a little premature in that pronouncement there. But I listened to what he said, and it's not so much that I had this great epiphany or turning or shift right there, but I said, okay, what do I really believe about this? I re-examined things that I had taken for granted, taken as the gospel truth for decades. Now, in that re-examination, I need to factor in some other things for you to help you understand sort of this shift. I'm a photographer, and one of my specialties is forensic photography. Part of that is morgue photography. And I have photographed a number of people who have been burned to death. When most people talk about hell, it is in a very hypothetical, imaginary sort of way. But I have seen what hell would look like, up close, personable, touchable, smellable. We discussed briefly me showing you a photograph of someone who has spent time in hell and decided not to. But I'll tell you that those images are very powerful and very disturbing, and you do not forget them. I'm remembering one man who his pickup truck was in a side collision, and for these particular trucks, the gas tank ruptured and would just blowtorch into the cab of this truck where this man was trapped. He was alive, conscious, coherent for 3 minutes while he burned to death. But the theology doesn't say 3 minutes or 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years or 3,000 years. It says forever. Okay, that's kind of hard to get your mind around. Hold that thought. In behavioral psychology classes, they've got a deal where they've got a T-shaped maze, and they put an animal in there and see where they go left to right through this maze. And the setup is that if they turn left, this is backwards to you, but if they turn left, they get a reward. If they turn right, they get a mild electric shock. The question is, how many times does an animal have to make this choice before they figure it out and learn to always turn left? Something as brainless, as mindless as an earthworm will figure this out in about 9 tries to always turn to the reward. Well, let's just kind of scope this out a little bit. What if instead of a mild electric shock, we've got a frying pan? And the poor worm, he doesn't have multiple shots of figuring this out. He's got one shot to get this right, and he either goes to the reward or goes to the frying pan. And for some of these worms, they don't even have a T-shaped maze. They've got an L-shaped maze that only allows them to turn towards the frying pan. Well, this wouldn't be a bad metaphor for this theology. Does God put us in a T-shaped maze that we can turn left and choose Jesus Christ and go to heaven? Or if we turn right and not choose Jesus Christ, we get the frying pan. And all those people in Africa and China that never heard of Jesus, their maze doesn't even turn left. It only goes right. The only option they have is eternity in hell. Well, as a metaphor, this starts to kind of break down because it gets absurd. It just gets weird. And I don't think much of the first-year psychology student that would be putting this thing together. Hold that thought. August the 6th, 2008 is a hot summer day in Oklahoma, and I am driving around in my car running errands, and I've got NPR on the radio, and they're interviewing an author, a guy by the name of Jason Siegel, and he has just released a book, Life After Death, The History of the Afterlife in Western Religion. Okay, so that's 700 pages of little itty-bitty print, and I ordered that thing and read it start to finish with a highlighter in one hand and a notepad in the other. But I was hearing this interview with him, and it was fascinating to hear how the concepts of hell and the afterlife have evolved as societies have evolved over the centuries. Hell did not come out of Christianity or even Judaism. It came out of way back there in some of the Persians. The very day I was listening to this conversation, this interview with this author on NPR, I got a phone call. My aunt had been terminally ill for months, and she was to the point of passing away, and I needed to get over to St. Francis Hospital. And so I went over there, and that afternoon and evening and into the night, my family and her family sit around her bedside, and we watched my aunt die. Now, my aunt never went to church. She never went, was never known to be a Christian, to offer a prayer, make a confession of salvation. None of that. By all available evidence, she was lost. And we sat there and watched her slip out of this life into eternity, into hell, and nobody said a word. There was no offer of a sinner's prayer of repentance, the Romans road to salvation, anything. Nobody said a word. How could evangelicals, people of that mindset and that theology, that knowledge, not say a word? This is how. They don't believe it either. They may say they believe it, they may claim they believe it, but don't talk to me about what you believe. Show me what you believe. The words are, people will say anything, but what they do, evangelical Christianity, if they believed that doctrine, they would spend every dollar and every moment on evangelism, missionary work, and witnessing. They would not be having fireworks displays on the 4th of July and marriage enrichment seminars and all the things that those churches do. They don't believe it either. All of these things are factoring into my mindset, my beliefs, and I'm kind of getting my mind around this. I'm turning loose of the idea that hell is a doctrine worth keeping. Now, as I'm chewing on these things, part of what I'm thinking about is, if there is no hell, why would you lead a good moral life? What would be the motivation? As these things are kind of coming into my head and I'm working this out, it pops into my head that I could have sex outside my marriage. Start kind of thinking about my options here, But then the next thought that kind of comes into that head trying to figure this out is, no, that's not what I want to do. Why not? Well, I don't want to do that because that would hurt Rebecca. Did you see this? This is a Teutonic shift. This is a huge shift from a morality, a theology, an ethics based on fear and punishment to based on love for another person. Whew, that's big. That was big for me. I think God's plan for us all along, the human race throughout the centuries, has been for us to develop, evolve a morality, a theology, an understanding of Him, an understanding of our lives based on love for each other, not fear and punishment, not heaven and hell. Okay? So in this sense of the word, has Unitarian theology and morality and doctrine undermined my core beliefs? My core beliefs is that God is a God of love. Hell was the contradiction. Unitarian theology confirms my core belief of a God of love. And to that, I would say, hallelujah.
Rows and flows of angel hair and ice cream castles in the air and feathered canyons everywhere. I've looked at clouds that way, but now they only block the sun. They rain and snow on everyone. So many things I would have done, but clouds got in my way. I've looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow it's clouds' illusions I recall. I really don't know clouds at all. Moons and Junes and Ferris wheels, the dizzy dancing way I feel as every fairy tale comes real. I've looked at love that way, but now it's just another show. You leave 'em laughing when you go, and if you care, don't let it show. Don't give yourself away. I've looked at love from both sides now, from give and take, and still somehow it's love's illusions I recall. I really don't know love at all. Tears and fears and feeling proud to say I love you right out loud. Dreams and schemes and circus crowds. I've looked at life that way, but now old friends are acting strange. They shake their heads, they say I've changed. Well, something's lost, but something's gained in living every day. I've looked at life from both sides now, from win and lose, and still somehow it's life's illusions I recall. I really don't know life at all.
When is the last time you changed your mind about something or someone important? When is the last time you looked at something from up and down, from both sides now, and discovered that you actually know less than you thought you did? It does happen. It happened to Doug. And instead of losing his faith or his connection to God, the God of his understanding, his faith was deepened through his doubt. It also happened to George. I want to tell you the story about George de Benville this morning, who is sometimes called the father of universalism, of this message of universal love on this land, this part of the world here in North America. This happened in the early 18th century, so before we were even a country. George de Benville is his name. He was raised by his godmother, who was Queen Anne of England. So he was in the upper classes, and he was raised to believe, he was taught to believe that he was better than other people. He was taught to recognize, rely, and rest not only in his difference from others, but on his own sense of superiority. He was part of the aristocracy, and he was sent at 12 out to sea on a ship to learn the art of navigation. These are his own words. I was self-exalted and believed myself to be more than other men, he wrote. Believed that I belonged to a different class from mankind in general. And he tells a story of being on the ship and some Moors, which would have been Muslims from North Africa, some Moors coming on the ship with wares to sell. And he tells a story of one of the men falling down and injuring his leg, and his companions, the friends of this man, running up to be with him and actually physically kissing his wound and shedding tears on his wound, and then turning towards the sun and in loud voices proclaiming and praying for their friend to be healed. And George de Benville describes his own reaction, which was to become very angry at all this ruckus and noise and drama and to order these men to be brought to him. And he demands that they explain what all this hoopla is about. And they see that he's angry. And they explain that the reason that they're crying and praying and kneeling and tending to their friend is because their friend fell and hurt himself. And that they kissed the wound of their friend to sympathize and to show their love and affection for their friend, and that they cried their tears upon their wound because they knew their tears were salty and would help the wound heal, and that they were praying because they were imploring with the God of their understanding that their friend would recover and be healed. And de Benville listened to them and was convinced by them. He was moved by them. He writes, "I thought my heart would break and that I would die." His eyes filled with tears, and he felt an internal condemnation of his own spirit. He felt the wrongness of his own ways, and he shouted out on the ship, "Are these men heathens? No, I confess before God that I am the heathen and they are the better Christians." He was 12 years old, and it was the beginning of a journey much like the one that Doug described to us, that happens experience after experience after experience if we're paying attention. He felt his heart breaking, maybe because of the pain he witnessed, maybe because of the compassion he witnessed, but he felt his heart breaking more so because he knew he had been wrong to judge those men. He knew he had been wrong to think of himself as superior to anybody else, to think of himself as better. He allowed himself to feel that pain of being wrong, and he was freed from his own sense of superiority. Carlton asked us an interesting question last week. He asked us, "What did believing in hell give you?" And I think it's an important question to consider. I had a really interesting conversation with a couple after the first service about where they are in their journey and how their heart is calling them here, but how it's so hard to leave behind the ways that they know and the relationships that they have, and what it means to make this shift. So it's important to consider, wherever you are on that journey, what did believing in the old ways give you? And hell, in one way, gives us a sense of superiority. I'm saved, you're not. I know the way, you don't. I'm special, you're not. You can feel better than other people. But this message of universalism that George de Benville preached on these shores is not about that. It's not about that. It's not about that. And you don't just have to be a dogma-bound Christian to think you're superior to someone else. We all do it. We all find ways. We look out around at the world and the people around us, and we compare ourselves and we rank ourselves and each other, and we find ways to think, oh, I am okay because look at that person over there. I know all too well, way too well, what it's like to live in that hell. So I'm happy this week to be reminded of that living hell that we create ourselves, and that we can step out of ourselves. So remember this week, when you start thinking that you're better than somebody else because of what you believe or what you wear or how much money you make or where you're from or your education or your gender, your sexual identity, how gifted you are, the color of your skin, your birth order, your role, your job, you are in hell. Our beloved minister emeritus, the Reverend Dr. John Wolfe, used to say that Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden because once they ate the apple, they thought they knew it all. And no one ever does or can. De Benville emigrated to America in 1747. He was a preacher and a doctor until he died at the age of 90. He was on friendly terms with indigenous tribal members, and he used many of their herbal remedies for treating diseases. And he tried to understand their languages and their symbols because he believed all symbols of the same truth equally valid. I'm just going to say that again, because he believed all symbols of the same truth equally valid. He could converse across cultures and religions. He thought that taking religious truths literally rather than symbolically was the cause of many religious conflicts. Hell, you could say, describes a human state of being. Behind every appearance of diversity, he preached, there is an interdependent unity of all things. Behind every appearance of diversity, there is an interdependent unity of all things. Our love must be based upon mutual respect for our differences. We must be curious then. We must be curious about our own conversions and the progression of our own conversions and metanoias and changes of heart in the course of our own lives. We must keep our minds and our hearts open to understand more and more and more as we learn to swim. Is he doing that too? As we learn to swim onto the other side. So let that be our practice this week together, to forget what you think you know and to let your minds and hearts be changed. May it be so. Amen.
We're so happy you're visiting with us online today. We love connecting with people all across the country and around the world, sharing our powerful message of love beyond belief.
There's something new happening here. You can now join All Souls as a virtual member. Our virtual membership is designed for friends who live outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and who want to engage with All Souls in a meaningful way.
You can be part of an expanding family, a global family really, wherever you are. If you live in Oklahoma,
Ohio,
or Orange County, California,
Canada,
or Cameroon. By becoming a virtual member, you'll be able to deepen your connections with members and friends here in Tulsa and with members wherever you are.
Each week, you'll receive special All Souls content tailored for you, our virtual members. Virtual members have access to pastoral care, to personal prayers, and also receive invitations to exclusive web events.
You can learn more, and if you're ready, you can become a virtual member today by visiting allsoulschurch.org/virtual membership.
We're grateful our ministries are having a positive impact on your life, and we want to share the good news of love beyond belief with more and more people. So no matter what, we need your support to keep this ministry growing and thriving, so please consider making a gift today. You can do so by texting
Love BB for Love Beyond Belief to 73256, or simply visit our website. You are a blessing in our lives. May you be blessed
and be a blessing.